douse the blaze from the inside. The Petroleum Club had been a favorite gathering spot for Tulsa business people for years, a place of high-powered lunches and meetings. Now, this. If there was one positive note in all this, Carol, it was the lack of injuries, except for the one firefighter. You know, I think the timing had a lot to do with that, striking at 6 or 6:30 after most of the offices were closed, and that's the lucky thing in all this.
Exactly. It's been difficult. Captain White told me the firefighters will be on the scene over the overnight hours, watching for any hot spots that might flare up, and also mopping up and cleaning up the mess. And we might mention, I believe they've said that probably the 12th floor at least, maybe the 11th floor, will probably have smoke and water damage. Is that your information?
That is our information. I think there's going to be a lot of damage on those upper floors, and it'll take weeks and weeks and months probably to clean up.
Yeah. Well, the flames were fully involved, and one reason could be that this building, which was built in 1963, is not equipped with a sprinkler system. The fact that there is no sprinkler system and the fact that ladders only go to the 7th floor caused concern for firefighters, and Mike Jones has more on that.
The Petroleum building does not have a sprinkler system.
I know we don't have any on our floor.
What do you think?
Well, I think they probably need them. It probably would have done a lot less damage.
City code requires all buildings constructed or remodeled after 1975 to have sprinkler systems. This building went up in 1964.
And unfortunately, we don't have a grandfather clause or retrofit clause where we can go back, mandate these occupancies to be sprinkled. It would have made a tremendous difference tonight.
And the city isn't likely to go back and require sprinklers.
Many of these older buildings, they simply can't afford it. So there's really not much they can do. They can't force them to do something that would put them into bankruptcy. So, you know, that's not very effective. So it's a tough deal.
One other challenge, at least for firefighters, is that their ladder trucks only go up for 7 stories. This building is 16 stories tall, and there are a lot of other downtown Tulsa buildings that are even taller. The firefighters themselves don't seem to mind that much.
You're still going to have to use the stairways. I wouldn't want to carry the equipment up ladders.
But taller ladders would aid in rescue.
I think they need longer ladders. There's a lot of buildings down here over 7 stories tall.
Another expense that will come under consideration after this fire. Mike Jones, Oklahoma's News 8, downtown Tulsa.
Believe it or not, though, the equipment shortfalls were not as big of problems as you might think, and Terry Bowers has been talking with the firefighters tonight about some of the other difficulties and struggles they faced.
Well, believe it or not, they haven't been as troubled by the cold as you might think. Take those 7-story ladders, for example. Actually, they've been a blessing and a burden. It's hard to believe, but they've been able to stay warm some of the time because of those ladders. They've had to do a lot of their firefighting on the inside, but there's the bad news. That means they had to climb the 15 flights of stairs, and that is with their heavy gear. And to keep the crews from getting too fatigued, they are rotating, but that's where the cold became a very bitter enemy.
In something of this magnitude, we've got to put crews together. We've got to log where they're going, keep track of everybody, kind of an accountability type system. So we can send them up. Once you're inside again, it's all right inside. It's just the waiting down here that's the cold part.
And as if the cold were not tough enough, that water they used to fight the fire became an enemy in itself. As it hit the concrete, it froze, making it very cold and very slippery. They had to bring in the sand trucks that we saw earlier this week to try to make that situation more manageable. So, Carol, a very tough fire for them to fight in a lot of ways.
Oh, definitely. You know, when I arrived on the scene, Terry, there were embers and glass falling from the top of the building. And in fact, they were keeping people away, which is a very good thing. But hundreds of people came down to see the flames for themselves, and some of them stood by waiting on word of their loved ones who might have been in the building. Yvonne Harris has more.
Dwayne Nolan is worried about his brother-in-law who works inside the Petroleum Club, and his family hasn't heard a word.
I walked around the block. I could see him standing in the crowd, but I don't see him.
Some people were standing around to see what would become of the building where they worked.
It's just very tragic. It's very upsetting.
Because that's where you work.
Oh, it is. That's part of my livelihood.
Laura says she heard the fire alarms and thought nothing of them. She'd heard them before. But this time it wasn't a false alarm. This time it was real, and people inside were trying to get out.
People across the street in the bank were waving at me, get out or whatever, and I walked out the front. And I looked straight up, and the roof was on fire.
And at the top, at the Petroleum Club, is where Dwayne Nolan's relative has worked for 25 years.
I'm really concerned about my brother, you know.
And he and his family will continue to be spectators in the crowd until they're certain their loved one is safe. Yvonne Harris, Oklahoma's News 8, downtown Tulsa.
And tonight we are happy to say that firefighters say that everyone in the building is accounted for. Once again, one firefighter taken to the hospital for an injury to his shoulder. He is in good condition. You know, Tulsa has indeed lost a landmark tonight, a little piece of history. The Petrolium Club was built in 1963 for a price tag of $4 million, 16 floors, and originally it had marble covering, which was very extravagant, very beautiful. It seemed to fall off the building, so that later had to be replaced. A landmark is gone tonight. The building itself is still standing. There are 13 other floors in use, and those offices are expected to continue on business as usual, except for perhaps the 11th and 12th floors tomorrow. That's about here. As I mentioned, the firefighters will remain on the scene throughout the overnight hours, watching for any hot spots, cleaning up the mess. We will have the very latest on Good Morning Oklahoma at 6 in the morning. Join us then for the latest details. Now back to you, Charles.
Thank you much, Carol, for being out in the cold with all the rest of the crew. You guys did a fine job.
Well, thank you very much.
We'll join you later for an update.